Excerpt from Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë, 1847. Read by Lena Loves Good Stories. Jane Eyre is one of the great love stories of the 19th century, but I think primarily it is an almost revolutionary tale about a defiant, fiercely intelligent woman who refuses to accept her appointed place in society and instead finds love, but not only love, but also herself and her meaning in life on her own terms. In the scene I'm going to read, she has recently started her position as governess at Thornfield Hall, where she teaches Adele, a young French girl, who is the ward of Mr. Rochester. And this conversation is the second time that she and Edward Rochester speak to each other. We were, as I have said, in the dining room. The lustre, which had been lit for dinner, filled the room with a festal breadth of light. The large fire was all red and clear. The purple curtains hung rich and ample before the lofty window and loftier arch. Everything was still, save the subdued chat of Adele, she dared not speak loud, and, filling up each pause, the beating of winter rain against the panes. Mr. Rochester, as he sat in his damask-covered chair, looked different to what I had seen him look before. Not quite so stern, much less gloomy. But still, he looked preciously grim, cushioning his head against the back of his chair, and receiving the light of the fire on his granite-hewn features and in his great dark eyes. For he had great dark eyes, and very fine eyes too. Not without a certain change in their depths sometimes, which, if it wasn't softness, reminded you, at least, of that feeling. He had been looking 2 minutes at the fire, and I had been looking the same length of time at him, when, turning suddenly, he caught my gaze fastened on his physiognomy. "You examine me, Miss Eyre," said he. "Do you think me handsome?" I should, if I had deliberated, have replied to this question by something conventionally vague and polite, but the answer somehow slipped from my tongue before I was aware. "No, sir." "By my word, there is something singular about you," said he. "You have the air of a little nonnette, quaint, quiet, grave, and simple, as you sit with your hands before you and your eyes generally bent on the carpet, except, by the by, when they are directed piercingly to my face, as just now, for instance, and when one asks you a question or makes a remark to which you are obliged to reply, you rap out a round rejoinder, which, if not blunt, is at least brusque." "So, no. What do you mean by no?" "Sir, I was too plain. I beg your pardon. I ought to have replied that it was not easy to give an impromptu answer to a question about appearances, that tastes mostly differ, and that beauty is of little consequence, or something of that sort." "You ought to have replied no such thing. Beauty of little consequence, indeed. And so, under pretence of softening the previous outrage, of stroking and soothing me into placidity, you stick a sly penknife under my ear. Go on, then. What fault do you find with me, pray? I suppose I have all my limbs and all my features like any other man." "Mr. Rochester, allow me to disown my first answer. I intended no pointed repartee. It was only a blunder." "Just so. Yes, I think so, and you shall be answerable for it. Criticize me. Does my forehead not please you?" He lifted up the sable waves of hair which lay horizontally over his brow, and showed a solid enough mass of intellectual organs, but an abrupt deficiency where the suave sign of benevolence should have risen. "Now, ma'am, am I a fool? Far from it, sir. You would, perhaps, think me rude if I inquired in return whether you are a philanthropist. There again! Another stick of the penknife, where she pretended to pat my head. And that is because I said I did not like the society of children and old women, low be it spoken. No, young lady, no, I am not a general philanthropist. But I bear a conscience. And he pointed to the prominences which are said to indicate that faculty, and which, fortunately for him, were sufficiently conspicuous, giving, indeed, a marked breadth of the upper part of his head. And besides, I once had a kind of rude tenderness of heart. When I was as old as you, I was feeling fellow enough, partial to the unfledged, unfostered, and unlucky, but fortune has knocked me about since. She has even kneaded me with her knuckles. And now, I flatter myself I am hard and tough as an India rubber ball, pervious, though, through a chink or two still, and with one sentient point in the middle of the lump. Does that leave hope for me? Hope of what, sir? Of my final retransformation from India rubber back to flesh. Decidedly he has had too much wine, I thought. And I did not know what answer to make to his queer question. How could I tell whether he was capable of being retransformed? You look very much puzzled, Miss Eyre, and though you are not pretty any more than I am handsome, yet a puzzled air becomes you. Besides, it is convenient, for it keeps those searching eyes of yours away from my physiognomy, and busies them with the worsted flowers on the rug. So, puzzle on. I am disposed to be gregarious and communicative tonight. With this announcement he rose from his chair and stood, leaning his arm on the marble mantelpiece. In that attitude his shape was seen plainly, as well as his face. His unusual breadth of chest, disproportionate almost to his length of limb. Yes, I'm sure most people would have thought him an ugly man. Yet there was so much unconscious pride in his port, so much ease in his demeanour, such a look of complete indifference to his own external appearance, so haughty a reliance on the power of other qualities, intrinsic and adventitious, to atone for the lack of mere personal attractiveness, that, in looking at him, one inevitably shared the indifference, and, even in a blind, imperfect sense, put faith in the confidence. I am disposed to be gregarious and communicative tonight, he repeated, and that is why I sent for you. The fire and the chandelier were not sufficient company for me, nor would Pilate have been, for none of these can talk. Adele is a degree better, but still far below the mark. Miss Fairfax ditto. You, I am persuaded, can suit me, if you will. You puzzled me the first evening I invited you down here. I've almost forgotten you since, but tonight I'm resolved to be at ease. It would please me now to draw you out, to learn more of you. Therefore speak. Instead of speaking, I smiled, and not a very complacent or submissive smile either. Speak, he urged. What about, sir? Whatever you like. I leave both the choice of subject and the manner of treating it entirely to yourself. Accordingly, I said, and said nothing. If he expects me to talk for the mere sake of talking and showing off, he will find he has addressed himself to the wrong person, I thought. You are dumb, Miss Eyre. And I was dumb still. He bent his head a little towards me, and with a single hasty glance seemed to dive into my eyes. Stubborn, he said, and annoyed. Ah, it is consistent. I put my request in an absurd, almost insolent form. Miss Eyre, I beg your pardon. The fact is, once for all, I don't wish to treat you like an inferior. That is, I claim only such superiority as must result from 20 years' difference in age and a century's advance in experience. This is legitimate. Et j'y tiens, as Adele would say. And it is by virtue of this superiority, and this alone, that I desire you to have the goodness to talk to me a little now, and divert my thoughts, which are galled with dwelling on one point, cankering as a rusty nail. He had deigned an explanation, almost an apology, and I did not feel insensible to his condescension, and would not seem so. I am willing to amuse you, if I can, sir, quite willing, But I cannot introduce the topic because how do I know what will interest you? Ask me questions, and I will do my best to answer them. Then, in the first place, do you agree with me that I have a right to be a little masterful, abrupt perhaps, exacting sometimes, on the grounds I stated, namely that I am old enough to be your father, and that I have battled through a varied experience with many men of many nations, and roamed over half the globe, while you have lived quietly with one set of people in one house? You must do as you please, sir. That is no answer. Or rather, it is a very irritating, because very evasive one. Reply clearly. No, I don't think, sir, you have a right to command me, merely because you are older than I, or because you have seen more of the world than I have. Your claim of superiority depends on the use you have made of your time and experience. Huh. Promptly spoken. But I won't allow that, seeing it would never suit my case, you see, as I have made an indifferent, not to say a bad use of both advantages. Leaving superiority out of the question, then, you must still agree to receive my orders now and then, without being piqued or hurt by the tone of command. Will you? I smiled. I thought to myself, Mr. Rochester is peculiar. He seems to forget that he pays me £30 per annum for receiving his orders. The smile is very well, said he, catching instantly the passing expression. But speak, too. I was thinking, sir, that very few masters would trouble themselves to inquire whether or not their paid subordinates were piqued or hurt by their orders. Paid subordinates? What? You are my paid subordinate, are you? Oh, yes, I had forgotten the salary. Well, then, on that mercenary ground, will you agree to let me hector you a little? No, sir. No, not on that ground, but on the ground that you did forget it, and that you care whether or not a dependent is comfortable in his dependency. I agree heartily. And will you consent to dispense with a great many conventional forms and phrases without thinking that the omission arises from insolence? I'm sure, sir, I would never mistake informality for insolence. One I rather like, the other nothing freeborn would submit to, even for a salary. Humbug. Most things freeborn will submit to anything for a salary. Therefore, keep to yourself, and don't venture on generalities of which you are intensely ignorant. However, I mentally shake hands with you for your answer, despite its inaccuracy, and as much for the manner in which it was said, as for the substance of the speech. The manner was frank and sincere. One does not often see such a manner. No, on the contrary, affectation or coldness or stupid, coarse-minded misapprehension of one's meaning are the usual rewards of candour. Not 3 in 3,000 raw schoolgirl governesses would have answered me as you have just done. But I don't mean to flatter you. If you are cast in a different mould to the majority, it is no merit of yours. Nature did it. And then, after all, I go too fast in my conclusions. For what I yet know, you may be no better than the rest. You may have intolerable defects to counterbalance your few good points. And so may you, I thought. My eye met his as the idea crossed my mind. He seemed to read the glance, answering as if its import had been spoken as well as imagined. Yes, you're right, he said. I have plenty of faults of my own. I know it, and I don't wish to palliate them, I assure you. I might have been very different, you know. I might have been as good as you, wiser, almost as stainless. I envy you, your peace of mind, your clear conscience, your unpolluted memory. A memory without blot or contamination must be an exquisite treasure, an inexhaustible source of pure refreshment, is it not? How was your memory when you were 18, sir? I was your equal at 18. Quite your equal, Miss Eyre.